My name is Olivia, and I'll be 25 years old this year. I've been happily married to my husband, Peter, for 5 years now. Our son, Max, recently celebrated his 4th birthday. When we first got married, I worked full-time, but now I balance a part-time job at the same company. Peter is 29, 3 years older than me. Our journey from dating to marriage was sparked by Peter's passionate advances. However, after we got married, I noticed a shift in his behavior. He became more domineering, and I struggled to adjust. Peter has a 19-year-old sister named Maria. The age gap between them seems to make Peter indulgent toward her. Before we got married, I didn't mind Maria's frequent visits. I thought they had a good sibling relationship, but things changed after we tied the knot. Maria started dropping by unannounced at all hours and expected to be catered to, never bringing anything as a gesture of thanks. Peter didn't address this behavior. Instead, he expected me to accommodate her demands. Maria would come over and act as if I was invisible, speaking only to Peter with a casual, "Hey brother, I'm here again," even when I wasn't prepared for another guest. I ended up serving Maria dinner, and Peter never seemed to understand my frustration, loudly blaming me for not being more considerate. Despite Maria's apologies, it was clear she enjoyed the special treatment Peter gave her. Afterward, I was left with the leftovers prepared during my own meal, while Peter and Maria continued their conversation on the sofa. They left the dining table in a mess, never acknowledging Max or me, treating us more like hired help than family. One evening, as I was about to take a bath with Max, Peter barged in, loudly instructing me to buy a cake for Maria, even though it was late. Maria insisted on having it immediately, and Peter blamed me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly went to the cake shop with Max and Tao. While we were there, I overheard their conversation. They were criticizing me, calling me inconsiderate, and questioning why Peter married me. Meanwhile, Max, although he didn't understand the words, sensed the tension between Peter and me. Trying to stay positive, I asked him what kind of cake he wanted, and he cheerfully requested one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop became a distraction from Peter's earlier words, as Max and I chatted about cakes. We arrived just before closing time and managed to find the cake Maria wanted. We bought 2 cakes, including the fruit-loaded one Max had asked for. When we got back home, I served the cakes to Maria and Peter. I then prepared Max's cake and went to the dining room. As soon as I placed it in front of Max, Maria pointed at it and said she wanted that cake. Before I could respond, Peter moved Max's chosen cake in front of Maria, ignoring Max's protests. Peter justified his actions by saying he bought the cake with his own money and had the right to choose for Max. Unable to hold back my emotions any longer, I expressed my dissatisfaction. Peter responded by threatening divorce. Max, who had stopped crying, anxiously held my hand. After a moment, he said, "Mom, I'd also love cake with strawberries on it. Yes, it's really delicious." While we were eating the cake Maria had initially wanted, I noticed how much Max was suffering, feeling that he had already endured too much. I decided to take action when I saw Maria reaching for Max's cake plate. I quickly lifted it away and took Max to the next room so he could enjoy his cake peacefully. Peter apologized to Maria, saying he was sorry for being stingy. Despite wanting to argue, I held back for Max's sake. Seeing Max enjoy his cake so innocently was a heartwarming sight. After finishing the cake, we decided to have a late bath and then sleep in Max's bed. The next morning, I discovered that Maria had already left. As I was preparing breakfast, I heard Max crying. To my shock, I found that his piggy bank, a gift from my father, was broken and all the saved money was gone. Max, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was heartbroken. When I asked Peter about it, he casually mentioned that Maria needed some money, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding Max, who was crying and shaking, I felt his pain so deeply that I ended up crying with him. It was painful to see Peter caring more for his sister than for his own son. I expressed my anger and sadness by confronting Peter, breaking my usual silence during arguments in front of Max. Without saying a word, Peter went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking: divorce papers. I had no idea he had hidden these papers. In a sudden burst of anger, he shoved the papers at me before storming out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Max, who had never cried over the issues with Peter and Maria before, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He cried through the night. Unable to bear seeing Max so hurt, I decided to skip daycare for the day. Max happily agreed with a loud yes and a faint smile. We spent the day together, playing and bonding. I brought down a picture book from the shelf and sat with Max on my lap. He happily remarked, "The teacher at the nursery today was Mama, right?" His little heart seemed so full of patience. I wanted to make the day special for Max, so I took a day off from work, even though this could potentially cause trouble at my job. My workplace kindly understood the situation and granted me the day off. In the morning, we visited the park, played hide and seek, and had fun in the sandbox and on the slide. When we got home for lunch, Max seemed sleepy. Normally, he would nap by himself, but today he fell asleep on my lap, just like when he was a baby. I initially thought about using his nap time to do household chores, but seeing him so peaceful made me decide to just enjoy the moment with him. I decided that today was special, so I let myself be comforted by Max's peaceful sleeping face and his gentle breathing. However, my serene moment was suddenly interrupted by a noise from the entrance, signaling that the front door had been opened. Since it wasn't Peter's usual time to come home, I became suspicious and quickly hid in the bedroom closet, holding Max close. I could hear Maria's voice echoing through the house. Trembling with fear, I listened as she searched for something and expressed frustration over not finding it. Maria then made a phone call, mentioning Peter and discussing their unsuccessful search. After hearing her lock the front door and leave, I put Max to bed and reflected on the strange events that had just unfolded. I couldn't understand why Maria had come into the house or what they were looking for. Suddenly, Peter seemed like a stranger to me, and I felt a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Quickly, I packed essentials for Max and myself, and we headed to the train station. We took the train to my parents' house, which was fortunately nearby, just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, my parents noticed something was wrong for my expression and welcomed us without asking any questions. I shared everything with them, including my fear of staying at our house due to Peter and Maria's actions. My mother suggested that Maria might have been looking for my belongings, possibly cash or cards. I recalled my past as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. When I decided to focus on raising Max after getting married, I entrusted the company to friends. Although I still worked part-time and kept in touch with the company from home, Peter was unaware that I was still the CEO. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Peter had tucked away. I expected that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. While I had mentioned to him that I received some assistance from the company, I deliberately kept the details about being the CEO and my savings private. This secrecy was a result of realizing early in our marriage that Peter struggled with managing money and tended to spend everything he earned. Initially, Peter provided only $200 a month for food expenses, and even suggested that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. However, the financial strain of raising Max and living on just $200 for food made it impossible for me to agree to that. Eventually, Peter reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he had me sign a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer. Since Max's birth, I had been using my savings for his nursery fees and clothes. Given that I only received $200 for food and never asked Peter for additional funds beyond that budget, He likely believed that my financial situation was limited. Considering Maria's apparent need for money and Peter's belief about my financial situation, they might be searching for my cash or cards. I have a separate savings account just for Max, into which a portion of my salary is deposited each month. Even though they're searching, they won't find the cash or cards since I always carry my valuables with me. However, there's still an unsettling issue. Maria might be entering our house when we're not there, and Peter might be allowing it. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables, including the cash and cards, in my parents' safe. While I was contemplating their need for money, Max came to me crying over his broken piggy bank and the shattered promise of saving up. Seeing his distress, my father was angry and vowed to call Peter. My mother suggested finding out their purpose calmly, as Peter's mention of divorce might be a tactic to shift blame onto us and make the divorce more favorable for him. To understand their intentions, I decided to record their conversation. I consulted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's for advice. When I returned home, I started cooking dinner while keeping my phone screen down to record secretly. Peter arrived home and immediately asked about my cash cards, which surprised me. When I questioned him, he gave vague answers and tried to deceive me. As I remained silent, Peter grew agitated and demanded all my part-time earnings for his sister. I refused and explained that the money was meant for Max's savings. In response, Peter angrily pushed the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for Max. He even implied that he valued Maria more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped preparing the meal, put the divorce papers in my bag, took Max's hand, and headed for the door. Peter loudly declared his serious intent for divorce and instructed me never to come back. I responded by saying I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. After leaving, I received numerous messages and calls from Peter, which I ignored. Turning off my phone, I sought refuge at my parents' house and shared the recording and divorce papers with them. Although I confessed to having no love or affection for Peter, I expressed my concern for Max. My parents advised me to do as I saw fit, acknowledging the potential emotional impact on Max if a divorce were to occur. While grappling with the decision to divorce Peter, Max expressed his hunger. Seeing my distress, my mother kindly made hamburgers, Max's favorite dish. Overwhelmed with emotions, I broke down in tears as we sat down to eat. As I expressed my concern for Max, tears welled up in my eyes. My mother, with a warm smile, told Max that she had prepared the hamburgers so that he and I could visit whenever we wanted. Taking a bite, Max exclaimed with joy, praising Grandma's hamburgers and saying he wanted to eat them every day. I responded that it was because the hamburgers were made with the love I have for him. In a touching gesture, Max took a big bite and offered it to me. Moved by Max's kindness, I couldn't hold back my tears, and despite my attempts to stop them, they continued to flow. My father, noticing Max's concern, reassured him that my tears were tears of happiness, not sadness. Hearing this, Max hugged me, understanding the moment. My father's eyes turned bright red as he realized the blessing of being with family. I told Max that family is precious, and he looked surprised, asking if Dad had said that only Maria was family. My father gently confirmed this, but then asked Max if he wanted to live with them as family. Max, with a laugh, happily agreed, making everyone smile. Despite contemplating the divorce, the meal felt so joyful that I finally decided it was time to part ways with Peter. I planned to tell Max about the divorce, and even though it weighed heavily on my heart, Max seemed to understand and was happy. He expressed his desire to live as a family, embracing the pet dog and calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older. Preparations for the divorce began with contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. The next day, we formalized the contract, and my father and Max shared comforting laughter while I lay in bed, reminiscing about my childhood. When I checked my smartphone the following day, I was ready to move forward with my decision. I found over 200 calls and messages from Peter, revealing his emotional instability. Exhausted, I turned off my phone, and with the lawyer's assistance, we explained the situation to my parents. It turned out that Maria had accumulated significant debt from gambling and a shopping addiction, with Peter acting as her guarantor. He had planned to use my savings to cover her debts. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Peter sobbed upon realizing that it was finalized. Although we anticipated disagreements about child support, he signed a pledge to pay $340 to Max every month. In a subsequent call from Peter, his tone was devoid of aggression. He calmly admitted to financial manipulation and explained his complex feelings toward Maria. I firmly asserted my decision and refused to reconsider. Hearing his faint sobbing before he wished me happiness and hung up, I remained strong until the end. I discussed future plans with my parents and decided to stay with them until Max grows up. I resumed my role as the company president and later learned that Peter and Maria had informed their parents about the divorce and their debt, resulting in their dismay. Today, I find happiness in being with my family.